The young and the restless spoilers. It was in the cold hush of dawn that Cole summoned Claire to the secluded drawing room at the back of Abbott Manor, the place where sunlight barely penetrated the heavy drapes and every whispered word seemed trapped in the dust motes swirling through the air. Even before Claire stepped across the threshold, she could feel the tremor in his voice pulsing through the walls. Cole, once her confidant in the grand design to undermine the Newmans and wrest control of the family throne, now stood before her with a gravity that had no space for pretense. He spoke without preamble of the reckoning he had come to deliver, the full unvarnished truth of the lies and manipulations that had corroded both families, the dark bargains struck in corridors of power, the calculated betrayals that had left Victoria reeling even as she clung to her illusions of belonging. According to Cole, the entire strategy was built upon one irreducible lie: Claire was not Victoria's daughter but Jordan's, a fact they had marketed as a short-term gambit to secure sympathy and influence. It had been a calculated move, an expedient ploy meant to vanish once their grip on the throne was assured. Yet the grand design had outgrown them both, ensnaring Claire in a gilded cage of false affection and manufactured sincerity from which she could no longer escape. As the words fell from Cole's lips, the air grew thick with tension and regret. He painted a bleak portrait of their recent successes, contrasting the heady rush of manipulated boardroom votes and orchestrated public appearances with the moral bankruptcy that lay at the heart of every triumph. He described the toll it had taken on Victoria, whose genuine yearning for acceptance had been exploited and then abandoned, her suffering dismissed as collateral damage in their war for power. He reminded Claire of the nights they had toasted to victory, of the smug satisfaction of seeing their enemies falter, and of the silence that had followed each conquest, a silence heavy with the unspoken question of how long they could persist in their deception before it consumed them both. He did not plead or beg; instead, he issued what felt like both confession and ultimatum. The time had come to set the record straight, to release Victoria from the trap they had laid and face the consequences of their own making. They could no longer cloak their ambition in the tarnished veneer of family loyalty. It was an act of mercy, he insisted, to themselves as much as to her, but one that required Claire's consent to move forward. In that moment, Claire's composure cracked. The veneer of politeness she had perfected over months gave way to something wilder, more desperate. She could see in Cole's eyes the frailty of his resolve, the flicker of shame that had begun to devour him from within. But she had tasted the intoxicating fruits of her fabricated lineage, the deference, the adoration, the sense that the world bowed at her whim. To relinquish that would be to exile herself from the only life she had ever known as her own. The thought of staring at Victoria's wounded gaze, at the confusion and betrayal she would feel upon learning they were not related, was more agonizing than any moral reckoning. With a flush of rage, Claire crossed the room and seized the small silver flask she kept hidden in a velvet-lined box beside her grandmother's portrait. She offered it to Cole with a cold smile and told him, without a tremor in her voice, that if he wanted to unveil their secrets, he would first have to drink to his own downfall. He recoiled, his protest a strangled gasp, but Claire's hand was swift. She twisted the cap off the flask and tilted it to his lips. Cole's eyes widened as the bitter liquid poured down his throat. He stumbled back, his face contorting in shock and revulsion as the poison took hold. Claire, her pulse pounding so fiercely she could feel it in her fingertips, watched impassively as he clutched at his gut, his knees buckling beneath him. He cried out for help, his voice echoing off the ornate walls that had borne witness to generations of intrigue and betrayal. But Abbott Manor lay silent. The staff, long accustomed to Claire's mercurial moods, hung back, too fearful to approach, too uncertain of what they would find. Claire simply stood over him, her breath steady, as his cries faded to ragged sobs. In that moment, she felt a twisted surge of triumph. She had forced him to taste the poison of his own conscience, and in doing so, had reaffirmed her dominion over the truth itself. When Cole finally collapsed in a heap on the Persian rug, the last of his strength spent, Claire turned away. She replaced the flask in its velvet cradle, smoothing its surface until it gleamed under the chandelier's light. She allowed herself one glance backward at the crumpled form on the floor, a man who had dared to imagine she might choose honesty over privilege, and felt a pang of something that could almost have been regret. But only almost. She had looked into the abyss of her own ambition and chosen to leap rather than to retreat. In the hush that followed, her breathing slowed until it matched the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, each second marking the irreversible step she had taken. The knowledge she and Cole had shared would now remain buried beneath the weight of her resolve and the finality of his surrender. Outside, the world moved on as though nothing had happened. The garden gate swung open for the delivery of fresh newspapers. The city beyond carried on with its routines of commerce and gossip, unaware that the fabric of one of its most powerful dynasties had been rent apart in that secluded chamber. Claire swept from the room, her posture regal, her expression flawless, ready to face any question, any accusation, with the same composure she had exhibited all along. She would tell them Cole had fled, that his last words had been a fevered attempt to manipulate her once more. She would frame his collapse as proof of his instability, a cautionary tale of the dangers of obsession. And she would ensure that no one dared to pry further, no one dared to disturb the intricate lattice of half-truths and omissions she had built around herself. In the days that followed, Cole's whereabouts remained a matter of conjecture. Some whispered he had retreated to Europe, to lick his wounds in the anonymity of foreign streets. Others speculated darker fates, unspoken but understood. Claire stood at the center of it all, her secret intact, her power undiminished, and yet, each night as she lay in the sumptuous bed of her childhood room, she felt the ghost of Cole's final plea stirring beneath her skin. She had won, but at what cost? The luxury she had seized came with an emptiness she could not fill, a silence so profound that it echoed louder than any confession. And somewhere in the heart of Abbot Manor, the line between victory and devastation had become so fine that Claire could no longer be certain which she had embraced. Cole's faith in Claire had always been tempered by the knowledge of her lineage, Jordan's daughter, inheritor of her mother's calculating ruthlessness, and yet, time and again, he convinced himself that Claire was different. After all, she had played her part so perfectly in every scheme, weaving herself into the tapestry of Genoa City's elite with a beguiling mixture of vulnerability and ambition that had convinced even the most jaded observers of her sincerity. But now, standing in the dim light of the Manor's deserted conservatory, Cole felt the weight of his misjudgment pressing down upon him like a stone. He had warned himself that Claire's ambition was a double-edged sword, forged in the fires of Jordan's dark past, but he had convinced himself that love and loyalty would blunt its edge. How could he have been so blind? The whispers of Victoria's potential fate, the idea that Claire might be willing to go so far as to see her own half-sister perish at her hands, echoed in his mind, each syllable a hammer pounding against his reason. And yet, as much as he feared for Victoria, he feared equally the fate of Jordan herself, for rumors persisted that she was not dead but had vanished into some web of espionage and subterfuge that defied explanation. Some claimed she'd been spirited away by clandestine operatives in the dead of night, others insisted she had faked her death entirely to escape the fallout of her own machinations. No one knew the truth, and that uncertainty gnawed at Cole with the intensity of a live coal beneath his skin. Meanwhile, in the sunlit expanse of Chancellor Park's secluded rose garden, Victoria paced along the gravel pathway, her mind entwined with an almost maternal concern for the daughter she adored. She thought of Claire's bright eyes, the laughter that had once sounded so genuine in their shared moments, and the sense of pride she had felt when Claire had first called her mother. Victoria had believed, oh, how she had believed, that Claire's heart was as pure as her own devotion. She had lavished upon her daughter the finest designers, the most prestigious invitations, and an endless well of affection that knew no bounds. But now, in the wake of Cole's confession and the ensuing poison plot that had nearly claimed his life, Victoria sensed a shift beneath her feet, a tremor of doubt that threatened to upend everything. Did Claire truly possess the merciless cunning of Jordan, or was she a victim of her mother's shadow, struggling to emerge into the light? The roses overhead seemed to sigh in the gentle breeze, as if the garden itself mourned the loss of innocence. Victoria's every instinct urged her to confront Claire, to demand the truth of her intentions before the darkness could claim another victim. Yet, she hesitated. The very thought of betrayal cut her to the core. How could the daughter she loved so fiercely harbor such malice? And what of the possibility that Jordan still lived, orchestrating events from beyond the grave? Those rumors haunted her. If her daughter was indeed Jordan's child, then Jordan's DNA pulsed through Claire's veins as potently as any bond of blood. Still, Victoria could not ignore the other side of the coin: Claire's tears when she learned of Cole's betrayal, her palpable fear when the elder Abbott threatened her with exposure. Those moments felt real, too real to dismiss as mere performance. How was a mother to choose between love and suspicion when both were so vividly intertwined? As twilight deepened into dusk, Victoria made her way back to the marble terrace where Claire awaited, the girl's silhouette framed by the soft glow of lanterns. Claire's posture was rigid, her eyes reflecting the turmoil she strove to conceal. Victoria's heart clenched at the sight of her, a mother's grief mingling with resolve. She approached slowly, each step an act of courage. "Claire," she began, her voice steady though her chest tightened with emotion, "there are questions that demand answers tonight." Claire's gaze flicked up, a flicker of defiance and fear dancing in her pupils. Victoria reached out, placing a hand on Claire's arm, an anchor in a sea of uncertainty. "I need to know if you intended harm to Cole," she said, her tone soft but unwavering. The name hung in the night air, a shackle that bound them both to the truth. Claire's breath caught, the silence stretched until even the rustle of leaves seemed thunderous. Then, with a shuddering gasp, she stepped away, her eyes glittering with a mixture of fury and desperation. "How dare you?" she hissed, voice trembling. "You think I would kill him? You think I'm my mother?" She paused, as if tasting the words before unleashing them fully. "Jordan's not dead," she spat, leaning into the accusation. "She's out there, and if it weren't for you, I'd find her. I'd prove that I'm not just the daughter of a monster." Victoria's hand fell away, uncertainty warping her features. "But I won't be controlled," Claire continued, voice rising. "Not by Grandpa, not by you. I'll do whatever it takes to survive." In those final words, Victoria heard both the echo of Jordan's ruthless creed and the tremor of a girl still clinging to her humanity. The night closed around them as mother and daughter stood in tense stalemate, each grappling with the chasm of suspicion that had opened between them. Victoria realized then that the path forward would demand more than trust, it would require an act of faith neither of them could fully muster. For the daughter she adored might yet be the architect of another tragedy, and the mother she revered might find herself powerless to stop it. In that moment, beneath the watchful stars, Victoria made a vow to uncover every buried secret of Cole's near-fatal deception, of Jordan's ambiguous fate, and of Claire's true heart, before the shadows she feared so deeply could claim another life. It began, as so many alliances do in Genoa City, with an offer too tempting to refuse, and with a grudge that refused to die. In the wake of her humiliating dismissal from Abbott-Com, Phyllis Summers had spent the past week seething in private, nursing her wounded pride as though it were the most fragile of glass sculptures. Billy Abbott's decision to replace her with Sally Spectra had cut deeper than a mere professional setback. It had felt like a betrayal by blood, a public declaration that her years of loyalty, her tireless battles to secure funding and salvage reputations, meant nothing to the very family for which she had poured her heart and soul. In the solitude of her sleek, minimalist apartment overlooking the city skyline, Phyllis replayed every moment of that fateful boardroom meeting in her mind. The way Billy's jaw had clenched when she spoke up for the latest marketing strategy, the cold finality in his eyes as he uttered the words "you're done." For a woman who had built her identity around being indispensable, the humiliation was almost too much to bear. And so, with fury like wildfire in her veins, she made a promise to herself: she would not walk away quietly. She would make him regret it. Across town, Victor Newman, ever the shrewd patriarch, had heard rumors of Phyllis's plight. He had watched from a distance as Billy's star had risen and as Phyllis's influence had waned. He had sensed in her anger a weapon he might wield. The timing was impeccable. Billy's impulsive scrubbing of Phyllis from Abbott-Combs hierarchy had created a rift in the Abbott camp, one that threatened to weaken the family's hold on its media empire just as Victor was poised to assert his own vision for the company's future. Victor knew that Phyllis possessed more than mere bitterness. She carried insider knowledge, strategic dossiers, confidential memos, even the coded exchange logs between Billy and his inner circle, that could tip the balance in a corporate feud. Moreover, rumors had circulated that Phyllis's tenure with the Abbotts had granted her glimpses into other skeletons lurking in the family closet, unauthorized deals, clandestine partnerships, perhaps even the whispered emergency fund that Jack maintained off the books. If Victor could secure her cooperation, he would gain not only leverage over Billy's fledgling initiatives but also an intelligence network capable of undermining any Abbott who dared to defy his will. And so the meeting was arranged for next week, in a discreet corner of the Chancellor Mansion's library, where family secrets collected like dust on leather-bound tomes. Phyllis arrived at the appointed hour, her every movement radiating a combination of indignation and steel. Heels clicking against polished marble, lips pressed into a determined line. Victor greeted her with those cool, appraising eyes that had unnerved adversaries and allies alike for decades. There was no warmth in his smile, only the faintest flicker of curiosity. What had she brought to the table, and how badly did she want to see Billy's empire crumble? The hush of ancient books and muted sunlight created a tension as palpable as any courtroom drama. Phyllis, for her part, laid her cards on the antique mahogany surface one by one. She knew of Billy's secret campaign to woo key advertisers away from Abbott-Com and funnel them into his new venture, an unbranded digital channel poised to siphon revenue at the first sign of market weakness. She had seen the hidden clauses in vendor contracts that would lock Abbott-Com into inflated licensing fees, all designed to drain the company's coffers and enrich Billy's personal venture. She had overheard late-night phone calls in which he boasted to Sally Spectra about breaking even by year-end, a projection so optimistic it could only be a ploy to lure investors into a high-risk gamble. And, more disturbingly, she hinted at conversations she'd intercepted between Billy and his new confidant, a data analyst whose loyalty was as dubious as the source of her funding. Victor listened without interruption, his expression inscrutable. When Phyllis paused, awaiting his reaction, he leaned forward, his voice low and authoritative. He did not deny her intel. Instead, he confirmed it, adding only enigmatic fragments of his own. There were indeed rumors of a shell corporation registered under a proxy name, one that would enable Billy to funnel profits offshore. There was talk of a hostile bid on a rival network's streaming platform, timed to coincide with Abbott-Com's quarterly earnings announcement, a maneuver that could trigger a stock plunge. Phyllis felt a surge of vindication. Her information was not only accurate but critical to Victor's unfolding strategy. Yet she also understood the unspoken terms. Knowledge came at a price. She had risked everything to obtain this intel, risking both her reputation and potentially her safety. Now, Victor would demand recompense, an exchange that might require her deepest loyalties and perhaps the most personal of concessions. Phyllis, for her part, was prepared. She pressed him for specifics. What would he offer in return? The answer was as complex as the labyrinthine Abbott family dynamics. Victor proposed an alliance of mutual benefit. She would become his clandestine advisor, providing real-time updates on Billy's machinations, while he in turn would restore her to a position of power, perhaps not at Abbott-Com itself, but within one of his subsidiary ventures that commanded even greater influence. He would grant her access to resources, capital, media channels, political connections, that would far exceed the authority she had lost. He would shield her from Billy's inevitable retaliation by leveraging his own network of board members, ensuring that any attempt to sideline her again would be met with legal injunctions and public exposés. And, above all, he would protect her from the fallout of exposing the Abbott family's secrets, repaying her loyalty with the most potent currency of all, a guarantee of safety and prosperity under his aegis. As Phyllis weighed the offer, she found herself caught between two imperatives. Her thirst for vengeance against Billy and her innate drive to thrive in the world of high-stakes media warfare. She imagined the day when Abbott.com's stock would crater, when investors would flee and Billy's carefully cultivated image of the wunderkind mogul would shatter. She envisioned her name, once tarnished by a perceived downfall, rising again above the ashes, an architect of his undoing. And she considered the lengths to which Victor would go to protect her, the power she would wield as his confidant. The memory of her boardroom humiliation burned in her mind, fueling a resolve that silenced every other thought. She nodded once, sharply, sealing the pact.